Hi, my name is Vanessa and I'm 16 years old. Tell me, have you ever regretted where you were born and who your parents were? Would you have liked to have a choice before you were born? I'd give anything for that. A lot of people are unlucky in life, and I've been unlucky since I was born. Watch this video to the end and you will learn how after being born into a poor family, you can become the president of your country. I was born in a very poor family. My parents barely had enough to eat, so they spent all their time at work. My mother was a cleaner at a local hospital for the poor, and my father was a parking attendant at a supermarket. There was no money for school, so I was entrusted with the upbringing of my younger brother. We lived in a poor neighborhood, and it seemed that everyone was happy with everything except me. People didn't want to change anything and were content with what they had, and that made it even worse. My peers did not want to learn. They just wandered around the street doing nothing and engaged in petty theft. That's why I didn't have much contact with them. And I spent all my free time reading books that I found in a landfill and watching news and political programs on TV. I had always been interested in that. Therefore, I try to understand the topic so that one day I would stand in power and change inequality in society. My younger brother, Richard, didn't share my love of politics and change. I kept telling him not to mess with the bad guys, but Richard never listened to me and joined a local gang of hooligans. When one gets everything and you get nothing? One day, the police called us and told us that he was at their station. When we got there, we found him sitting behind bars. He didn't want to tell us what happened, but the police officer told us. It turned out that his so-called friends persuaded him to help with the theft of a phone. When an expensive car was passing by, they pretended that one of them had been run over. And while the driver was figuring out what was going on, Richard had to steal the phone from the car. But the driver understood and caught Richard, and his friends ran away. The police let my brother go, but my parents had to pay all the money we had. I was incredibly angry with my brother. I warned him. He knew how difficult life was for us. So when he came to apologize, I turned away from him and decided not to talk to him anymore. Let him live as he liked if he didn't listen to my advice. It was evening. As always, I was watching a political program when I suddenly heard my parents talking. Neighbors had already given the second child to an orphanage because there was nothing to feed them with. It was cruel to the child. Why couldn't he live with his parents? And why wouldn't anyone give them some money so they could get their children back? It was at this moment that I heard the president's speech on the news. She announced a competition for aspiring journalists. It was necessary to write a socially significant article on one of the most important topics of our time. And the best part was that anyone could participate. I knew immediately that I had to participate. Finally, I would be able to prove myself, achieve something, and get out into the world. And most importantly, the winner would receive a monetary reward. This meant that I could move to a nicer neighborhood and start my life with a clean slate. I decided to write an article on social inequality. The deadline was 1 month, so I threw myself into the work. My parents couldn't keep track of my brother because of work, so they told me not to fill my head with useless articles and dreams, but to help around the house. It made me angry. How could they think so narrowly? I told them that working for a penny was useless and we needed to act decisively if we wanted to change something. A month passed. I gave up on them, on my brother, on the house, and I was busy with my article all the time. During this time, the neighbors gave another child to a shelter, and this was the last straw. I finally decided that I could no longer stay in this terrible place, and in my head I already imagined a nice house, nice neighbors, and a refrigerator full of food. When I finished the article, I went to the admissions office to submit it for review. I could have used the computer, but I didn't have one. And there, it turned out terrible. To participate in the competition, you didn't just need to submit an article, we needed to go public with it, with a witness. I used the case of Richard as an example in my article, so he could be the only witness. But I hadn't spoken to him in over a month. During this time, he began to communicate with those guys again and completely went out of hand. But I decided to try. I went up to him and asked him to be my witness. But instead of helping, I got a conviction. He became indignant and thought that I wanted to tell everyone about his shameful crime. But it was his own fault, wasn't it? What difference would it make if he embarrassed himself or not, if it helped me? When he heard this, he took offense and ran away from home. Have you ever used your loved ones for your own purposes? I had been looking for him for days, but to no avail. Desperate, I decided to go to the police for help. And when I got there, I saw a terrible picture. My brother was back in prison. But this time, he was bruised and covered in blood. Terrified, I grabbed the bars and asked what had happened. But he sat in a corner and said nothing. Then the police officer said that Richard tried to steal equipment in a household store, but the guards caught him and beat him. I begged the captain to let my brother out, but the captain said, no money, no freedom. All I could do was go home. And there was an unexpected surprise waiting for me. My article was approved and I made it to the final, which was today. I immediately ran to the contest. On the way, I realized that I was in my beggar's clothes with disheveled hair and not washed. When I got there, I tried to clean myself up, but it didn't get any better. There were rich kids in the competition, and they made me look like trash. It was my turn. I went to the podium and started reading my article. I was ashamed of the way I looked and the fact that my only witness was sitting in the police station. So I tried not to look in the crowd. I didn't want to see people judging and laughing at me. I felt so sorry for myself that I couldn't stand it and decided to just tell my life story. About a poor family, about neighbors, about a brother in prison. I didn't care about the contest anymore. I just wanted to talk. After finishing the story, the audience stood up and began to applaud me for a long time. And in the end, I won because I spoke from the heart and noticed what others did not notice. After all, unlike others, I knew firsthand about social inequality, so the topic was very close to me. After receiving the money, I immediately ran home. Along the way, I imagined packing up, moving to another area, buying a house there, going to university, and how my life became beautiful. But when I entered the house, I saw my parents sobbing with grief. My brother urgently needed surgery. During the beating, he got a concussion and blood got into his brain. But we already spent all the money on buying him out the first time. So the only way out was to move out of the apartment on the street and give the money for rent to the operation. At that moment, I realized that how could I change the whole world if I couldn't deal with problems in my family and neighborhood? So I gave part of the money to get my brother released for treatment in the hospital, and I gave the other part to the neighbors to take their children, making them promise that they would find work and feed their sons. I was back in the same position as I was in the beginning, without money or changes. But I wasn't going to give up. I gathered all my peers and asked them to help clear the area of garbage so that it did not look like a garbage dump. It was the only thing I could do. Surprisingly, the kids agreed. We spent a whole week doing it with the sweat of our brows. A local newspaper noticed this and wrote an article about how poor teenagers helped the state on their own initiative. So the authorities found out about our activities and allocated money for work. After this article, the kids started calling me our president. That's when I realized that to fix the whole world, you first need to start with yourself and your environment. After all, they are the world that surrounds me. I took care of my brother's upbringing and offered him and his gang to clean up garbage in the area for a small fee, so that they would not even have thoughts of stealing. They agreed with pleasure because they had never been paid before. I was invited to work as a journalist for a local student newspaper. They read the article that I prepared for the contest and they liked it very much. So now, I will earn money and help my family. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to our channel. And remember to start small.